The greatest love story in jazz history was never consummated. Billie Holiday and Lester Young called each other Lady Day and Prez, and when their eyes met on stage, time stood still, but they never kissed, never embraced, never made love. To the world, they were just musical partners. But the truth was far more complex, and Lester's wife Mary knew this truth so well that she wanted to kill Billie. When Lester died in 1959, Billie didn't cry, didn't speak. She just started drinking. 4 months later, she was dead too. It was as if when one stopped breathing, the other couldn't either. But this story began in 1930s Harlem, with Count Basie's orchestra, and that first glance changed everything. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications, because we'll continue sharing the darkest secrets of jazz history, the most forbidden loves, and the truths nobody knows. The air in Kansas City's Reno Club was thicker than usual that autumn night in 1937. Count Basie's orchestra was on stage, and on tenor saxophone was Lester Young, tall, lanky. A man who looked as if his instrument weighed more than he did. He was 28 years old, and just beginning to be recognized in the jazz world. His saxophone style was considered radical for the time. Unlike others, he didn't use an aggressive, powerful masculine tone, but instead produced a light, almost whisper-like, yet equally deep sound from his instrument. Some critics called it effeminate, and they meant it as an insult. Lester didn't care. He was just speaking in his own language, and that language was like no one else's. When Billie Holiday walked into the club that night, she was 22 years old. She'd come from New York, invited to Kansas City for a possible gig with Basie's orchestra. She wasn't Lady Day yet, wasn't a legend yet, but her voice already had it, that fragility, that pain, that power of a woman beaten down by the world but still standing. When she entered the club, the stage lights hit her face, and Lester Young looked up at that moment. He was playing saxophone, but forgot to breathe for a second. There was a note slip, a small mistake, but that moment changed everything. Billie looked at him. Lester looked at her. And everyone who witnessed those 2 seconds would later say the same thing. Something changed in the air like an electric shock. Count Basie would later remember this moment. When Billie walked into the club, Lester almost dropped his saxophone. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. The man had fallen in love, at first sight, but in a strange way, as if he already knew her. Billie didn't sing that night. She just sat, listened, and absorbed every note of Lester's saxophone. When the night ended, Lester approached her and his first words were, "I've heard you before, on record. You're different." Billie smiled and said, "You're different too. The way you play saxophone, you breathe with it." They talked until dawn that night, about music, about pain, about life, and about how close they felt to each other without ever touching. By morning, they both knew this wasn't just friendship, but it wasn't love either. This was something else, and there was no name for it yet. A few weeks later, Billie Holiday officially joined Count Basie's orchestra, and her stage partnership with Lester Young began. Their first recordings were made in late 1937, and those in the studio witnessed it. These two people were soulmates in music. When Billie sang a phrase, Lester's saxophone would come in as if it were the continuation of her sentence. There was no gap, no breath. It was as if a single being was emerging from 2 instruments. Producers called it telepathy, but the truth was much deeper. Billie and Lester could read each other's souls because they both carried the same pain, the pain of being society's outcasts, the pain of being misunderstood, the pain of being lonely, even in the middle of loneliness. The nicknames emerged during that period. Lester started calling Billie Lady Day, because to him, Billie was a noble woman, a queen, and even though the world didn't see her that way, he did. The day part came from Billie's last name, Holiday, but to Lester, Billie was also like daylight, shining in darkness, finding beauty even in hopelessness. Billie called Lester Prez, short for president, because to her, Lester was the president of the tenor saxophone, the best undisputed. But these nicknames weren't just names. This was an attempt to create a special world that no one from outside could understand. 2 people were building their own language, their own universe, and only they could enter this universe. Orchestra members started noticing. Lester and Billie spent hours together before and after concerts, but there was never any physical intimacy. They didn't hold hands, didn't kiss, rarely even touched each other. But the closeness between them was so intense that everyone felt it when they entered a room. Count Basie would describe this in an interview. There was no sexuality between Lester and Billie, but there was love. I don't know how to explain it, but this love was more powerful than being physical. It was as if two souls had merged but the bodies remained separate. This sentence is perhaps the summary of the entire story. Two people had completely become one, but were never consummated. And this non-consummation was for some pure love, and for others, unbearable torture. In 1938, Lester Young married Mary Dale. Mary was a small-time jazz singer, beautiful, ambitious, and thought Lester's career could elevate her. The marriage initially seemed like a partnership. Mary organized Lester's business, made concert reservations, controlled his money. But as soon as the honeymoon ended, Mary noticed something. Billie Holiday's name appeared repeatedly in Lester's diary. Played with Lady today, it was a great day. Lady is sick, I'm worried. Can't sleep without hearing Lady's voice. At first Mary thought these were friendship notes, but then she saw Lester and Billie together on stage, and she understood everything. On the ride home that night, Mary asked Lester, "What's going on between you and that woman?" Lester acted surprised. "Lady, she's my best friend," Mary said in a cold voice. "You don't look at friends that way." Lester fell silent because he didn't know what to say. There really was nothing physical between him and Billie. There never had been, but what Mary saw wasn't a lie. On stage, Lester and Billie were in such harmony that this wasn't just music. It was a dance, a flirtation, a declaration of love. And Mary knew a sexual relationship could be forgiven, ended, forgotten. But a soul connection is never forgiven because it never ends. In the following months, Mary's jealousy turned into obsession. She began controlling Lester's every move, who he talked to, where he went, whether he saw Billie. When Lester came home from concerts, Mary interrogated him. "Was that woman there? Did you look at her? Did you talk to her?" Lester initially kept his composure, but eventually became unbearable, because Mary was right. Billie was always on Lester's mind. Every time he played a note, he imagined Billie's voice. Every time he took a breath, he remembered Billie's perfume. But were these thoughts a crime? Lester didn't know. All he knew was this: he didn't love Mary, and he didn't love Billie either. Or maybe he loved both, but in different ways, and he couldn't figure out which was real love. In 1939, Mary sent a letter to Billie Holiday one day. The letter was full of threats. "Stay away from my husband. If you go on stage with him again, I'll kill you." When Billie received the letter, she showed it to Count Basie. Basie laughed, and said, "This woman is crazy." But Billie didn't laugh, because she understood what Mary meant. Mary was scared, and rightfully so, because the bond between Billie and Lester wasn't the kind of bond Mary could ever create. Billie didn't say anything to Lester that night. She just looked into his eyes on stage, and sang "I Can't Give You Anything But Love." Lester responded with his saxophone, and Mary was there in the darkness, watching helplessly. In 1940, Billie Holiday left Count Basie's orchestra. The official reason was musical differences, but the truth was far more complex. Mary Young was pressuring Basie. Either Billie goes or Lester goes. Basie couldn't risk losing Lester because Young was the heart of the orchestra's saxophone section. When Billie understood the situation, she quietly left. She didn't even say goodbye to Lester. She just left a note: "Prez, take care of yourself. I'll always be with you," in every note. Lester kept this note in his saxophone case for the rest of his life, and it was still there when he died. In the following years, Billie and Lester rarely saw each other, but they never lost contact. There were letters, brief phone calls, and occasionally nights when they happened to play at the same club. These meetings always went the same way: eye contact, a smile, and then music. Words weren't needed because everything that needed to be said was already in the notes. In 1944, Billie wrote a letter to Lester: "Sometimes I imagine talking to you. I tell you everything, my fears, my pains, my loves, and you understand me because you're inside me, in every breath I take. Lester didn't respond, but a week later he sent Billie a recording, his own solo performance, just saxophone, no other instruments. When Billie listened to this recording, she cried because Lester's every note was a response, an "I love you too" response, but one that would never be spoken. In 1945, Lester Young was drafted into the U.S. Army. World War II was continuing, and black men were also being drafted, but segregation continued. Lester was caught using marijuana in the Army, and was court-martialed. He received a 15-month prison sentence, and stayed in military prison at Fort Gordon, Georgia. This period broke Lester. Prison conditions were terrible. White officers humiliated, beat and degraded black prisoners. Lester withdrew, stopped talking, and lost music, because they took away his saxophone. His only comfort was Billie's letters. Billie wrote every week, "Prez, I need you to hold on, because when you come home, I'll be waiting for you. We'll go on stage and go back to those old days." But when Lester came home, everything had changed. He wasn't the same anymore. His saxophone playing had changed. The smile on his face was gone, and when he looked at Billie, that light in his eyes was no longer there. In the late 1940s, both Billie and Lester were lost in their own hells. Billie Holiday became a heroin addict. She was first introduced to drugs by a lover and quickly became addicted. She was arrested, went to jail, got out, was arrested again. Her career was shaken, her voice was damaged. Her license to perform in New York clubs was revoked. Lester drowned in alcohol. His post-war trauma never passed, and he started drinking a bottle of whiskey a day. His saxophone playing was no longer bright, light, breath-like as before. Now it was heavier, sadder, slower. Critics started saying Lester Young isn't what he used to be. But no one understood why. Lester was just tired. Tired of living, of fighting, and of desiring what he could never have. During this period, Billie and Lester's paths rarely crossed, but every meeting was a disaster. In 1948, the two performed on the same stage at Carnegie Hall. Before the concert, they met backstage. Billie had lost weight, her eyes were sunken, and there were injection marks on her arms. Lester was drunk, barely standing, and the trembling in his hands made it hard to hold the saxophone. The two looked at each other and said nothing. What was there to say? They were both being destroyed, and they knew it. When they went on stage, that magic happened again. Billie sang, Lester accompanied, and the audience applauded. But when they returned backstage, they both cried, because the magic they created was starting to fade. Mary Young was happy with Lester's condition. Because the weaker Lester got, the more lost he became, the further he drifted from Billie. Mary could now control Lester, she controlled his money, determined where he would play, and wanted him to completely cut off communication with Billie. Lester resisted at first, but eventually surrendered. In 1950, he wrote his last letter to Billie, "Lady, I love you but I can't take it anymore. Mary is destroying me, alcohol is killing me, and every time I see you it reminds me of what we've lost. Maybe it's better if we stay apart for a while." Billie didn't respond. What could she say? Lester was right. They were both being hurt, and maybe staying apart really was better. But the pain in her heart never passed. By 1957, Billie Holiday was 42 years old and looked much older. Years of heroin use, drinking, smoking, and emotional trauma had destroyed her body. Her voice was still powerful, but that young, fresh tone was gone now. Now it was more fragile, more pain-filled, more real. Lester Young was 48 years old and in a similar condition. Alcohol had caused cirrhosis, he'd lost weight, and he struggled even holding his saxophone. They both knew they didn't have much time left. And just then, CBS television launched a project, The Sound of Jazz. A live television program, bringing together jazz legends, and the producers made a decision. Billie Holiday and Lester Young would be reunited for the first time in years. When rehearsal day came, everyone in the studio seemed tense. Billie and Lester hadn't communicated properly in 10 years. Their last meeting had ended badly, and no one knew what would happen. When Billie entered the studio, Lester was sitting in the corner, cleaning his saxophone. Billie walked toward him. Lester looked up. They stared at each other for 2 seconds, and then Lester stood up, hugged Billie, and whispered, "Lady, I missed you so much." Tears streamed from Billie's eyes and she said, "Prez, I missed you too. Every single day." At that moment, everyone in the studio understood these two people still loved each other. Nothing had changed. The song chosen for the performance was Fine and Mellow, a blues song written by Billie, about heartbreak, betrayal, and loneliness. The live broadcast began. The camera focused on Billie. Billie approached the microphone and began singing. Her voice was shaky but sincere, broken but powerful. The first lines, "My man don't love me, treats me oh so mean." Every word was a confession, every note was pain. And then came Lester Young's saxophone solo. The camera turned to Lester. Lester raised his saxophone to his lips without taking his eyes off Billie, and began to play. That moment became one of the most emotional moments in television history. Lester's saxophone was responding to Billie's voice, as if two lovers were talking silently. The notes were more powerful than words. I love you too. Why could we never be together? Because we don't belong to this world. The camera zoomed in on Billie's face. Billie was looking at Lester, and tears were streaming from her eyes. Lester kept playing, his eyes closed, but tears were also streaming down his cheeks. When the solo ended, there was a horrified silence in the studio. No one could move during the live broadcast. Even the musicians were affected. This wasn't just a performance, this was a farewell ceremony. In March 1959, Lester Young was playing at the Blue Note Jazz Club in Paris. His health was very poor, cirrhosis had advanced, he could barely walk, but he was still on stage because he couldn't live without music. His last concert was on March 13th. When Lester went on stage, he could barely stand, but when he raised his saxophone to his lips, that magical sound came out again. Tired, sad, but still beautiful. When the concert ended, Lester told his friends, "I want to go home, I want to go back to America." The next day he boarded a plane and flew to New York, but he never made it home. When the plane landed, he was taken directly to the hospital. Cirrhosis was in its final stage. On the morning of March 15, 1959, Lester Young died at the Alvin Hotel in New York. He was 49 years old. Cause of death: alcohol, poisoning and cirrhosis. No one was with him. Mary Young wasn't even there, they had divorced years ago. Lester died alone, just as he had felt alone throughout his life, but before he died, he made one last gesture. He opened the saxophone case standing next to his bed, and reread that little note Billie Holiday had left 19 years ago. "Prez, take care of yourself. I'll always be with you, in every note." Lester pressed the note to his chest and closed his eyes. When Billie Holiday got the news, she was sitting in a bar in Manhattan. A friend called and said Lester died. Billie said nothing. She hung up the phone, asked the bartender for another glass of whiskey, and drank it. She didn't cry, didn't scream, just drank. But after that night, Billie Holiday changed completely. She no longer wanted to go on stage, didn't want to sing, didn't want to live. Her friends said Billie can't stand up, but the truth was, Billie didn't want to stand up, because the only reason she stayed alive was gone. When Lester Young left the world, Billie Holiday's soul went with him. 4 months after Lester's death, in July 1959, Billie Holiday was admitted to the hospital. She was diagnosed with liver and kidney failure. Years of heroin and alcohol use had destroyed her organs. Doctors told her family, she doesn't have much time. Billie was in Metropolitan Hospital, and her condition worsened every day. But the most painful part was this: FBI agents were standing guard outside Billie's hospital room, because Billie was still under arrest for drugs, and even before she died, she wasn't free. On the morning of July 17, 1959, Billie Holiday died at the age of 44. Official cause of death: liver cirrhosis and heart failure. But those who knew her knew the real reason: broken heart. Billie didn't want to live because she had no reason left to live. Lester was gone, music was gone, love was gone, only pain remained, and Billie was tired of carrying that pain. Before she died, her last words to the nurse were, "Lester is waiting for me. I'll finally be with him." The nurse didn't understand what she meant, but Billie smiled and closed her eyes. And at that moment, Billie Holiday became free. After the deaths of Billie Holiday and Lester Young, the jazz world was shocked. Two legends had left 4 months apart, and this was no coincidence. Music critics, jazz historians, and fans debated for years what really was between these two people. Why were they never together, and why didn't Billie hold on to life after Lester died? The answers were complex because this wasn't a simple love story. This was a story about soulmates, a bond that was non-physical, non-sexual, but deeper than any kind of love. Count Basie, in an interview he gave in 1960, said this: "It's impossible to explain what was between Billie and Lester. I spent 50 years in music, knew thousands of musicians, but I never saw a connection like this. Two people were like two parts of one soul. When they went on stage, even I forgot that they were two separate people. It was like one being, one sound coming from two instruments." Basie was right. Anyone who listens to Billie and Lester's recordings feels this. This isn't just music, this is a conversation, a dance, a declaration of love. Every note is a word, every silence is a breath, and the listener feels like they're witnessing an intimate moment between two lovers. But why were they never together? Why didn't they have a physical relationship? Some point to Lester being married, but that's not enough, because Lester's marriage to Mary was unhappy and divorce was possible. Some point to the social pressures of the time, race, societal norms, the gossip culture of the jazz world. But the truth was much deeper. Billie and Lester didn't get together because being together might have weakened the bond between them. A physical relationship, daily conflicts, expectations, disappointments, all of these could have tainted that pure untouched bond. Two people unconsciously made a choice. They chose to remain eternal, rather than be consumed. And this choice was perhaps the most painful but also the most beautiful choice. Mary Young lived for years after Lester's death. In the 1960s, she continued singing in small jazz clubs but never became successful. People knew her as Lester Young's ex-wife, and this title wasn't a source of pride but a mark of shame. Because everyone knew Mary had destroyed Lester. She had tried to control him, distanced him from Billie, and in the end, Lester died alone, unhappy, and alcoholic. Some jazz musicians openly blamed Mary. "That woman killed Prez," they said in the wings. Jealousy destroyed him. In 1972, a journalist reached out to Mary Young and wanted to interview her about Lester and Billie. Mary initially refused, but then agreed. In the interview, the journalist asked, "Was there really a relationship between Lester and Billie?" Mary was silent for a long time, and then said, "A relationship? No. There was nothing sexual. But there was love. And this love was more powerful than everything I experienced with him. I was Lester's wife, but Billie owned his soul. I couldn't live with that. Maybe the mistake was mine. Maybe I shouldn't have stopped them. Because Lester was happy with Billie, he was never happy with me." This confession was perhaps the most honest moment in Mary's life. But it was too late. Lester and Billie were gone, and Mary lived the rest of her years with guilt. Mary Young died in 1983. Only a few people came to her funeral. Her name wasn't even fully written on the gravestone. Mary Dale Young, 1910 to 1983. Lester Young's name wasn't even mentioned. It was as if Mary had been completely erased from Lester's life. And perhaps that was fair. Because the love that went down in history wasn't Mary. The love that went down in history was the unconsumed, platonic, but forever lasting love with Billie Holiday. The 1957 The Sound of Jazz performance can still be watched on YouTube today. Millions of people have watched that performance, and every viewing causes new tears. Because that 4-minute video isn't just a music performance, it's the moment two souls said goodbye. Billie Holiday and Lester Young are there, on screen, talking to each other in a moment frozen forever. Music historian Gary Giddens wrote this about the performance. The fine and mellow performance is one of the most important documents in jazz history. Because there's not just technical skill there, there's the human soul. Billie and Lester's glances, their notes, their silences, all tell a love story. And this story comes alive again with every viewing. Billie's look at Lester in that performance was analyzed, reanalyzed, watched in slow motion. Tears, smile, sadness, longing. Everything in that look. Lester's saxophone solo was similarly examined. Musicologists scrutinized the emotional intensity of the notes, the vibrato technique, and the silences. Result, Lester was declaring his love to Billie in that solo. The notes were words, "I love you. I always have. And you were the meaning of my life." Billie received this message. The tears are proof. And the world witnessed at that moment. True love sometimes lasts forever without ever being consumed, without ever being touched. Today, the fine and mellow performance is used as teaching material in jazz education. It's shown to students, and this question is asked: is music just notes, or is it something more? And every student gives the same answer. Something more, because Billie and Lester showed us that music is the language of the soul, and love is also sometimes expressed not with words, but with notes. The recordings Billie Holiday and Lester Young made together are among the most valuable archival materials in jazz history today. Between 1937 and 1941, they recorded dozens of songs together. This year's Kisses, I Must Have That Man, Mean to Me, All of Me and more. These recordings aren't just music. They're also documents of two souls' conversations, the same magic in every recording. Billie sings, Lester responds, and the listener feels like they're eavesdropping on a secret conversation. Music historian Dan Morgenstern wrote this about these recordings. When you listen to the recordings Billie and Lester made together, you notice something: there's no conflict, no discord. It's as if it's not two musicians, but one mind making music. How is this level of harmony possible? The answer is simple: love. Two people know each other so well that they don't need to predict the next note, they just know. This analysis is correct. There's telepathy in Billie and Lester's recordings. Before a note is played, the other is ready. Before a sentence ends, the other begins. This doesn't just come with practice, this comes with being soulmates. Today, these recordings are shown as examples of perfect harmony in music schools. But the real lesson is this: perfect harmony requires not just technical skill but emotional connection. Billie and Lester were this harmonious because they loved each other. And this love, nice, even though it wasn't physical, or perhaps because it wasn't physical, added infinite depth to the music. The story of Billie Holiday and Lester Young is still being told today. Documentaries are being made. Books are being written. Academic papers are being published. Why? Because this story is relevant, not just in the past but now too. Everyone has a Lester or a Billie in their life. The person you could never have but can never forget. Maybe a friend. Maybe a coworker. Maybe someone you met too late. And this story reminds us, some bonds exist not to be consumed. In 2021, psychologist Esther Perel wrote an article on platonic love and cited Billie and Lester as an example. Billie Holiday and Lester Young showed that a bond beyond romantic love is possible, even without physical intimacy. Two people can unite on a spiritual level, and this union can sometimes be deeper, purer, and more lasting than a sexual relationship. Perel is right, because Billie and Lester's love never ended. Even death couldn't end it. Even today, when you listen to those recordings, those two souls are still talking, still declaring their love to each other. Young jazz musicians today are inspired by Billie and Lester. We want a connection like that too, they say. We want to play so harmoniously with someone, and maybe some find it. But most don't, because what was between Billie and Lester wasn't ordinary. It was a miracle, and miracles don't happen often. The greatest love story in jazz history was never consummated. Billie Holiday and Lester Young were never together, but they died together. Lester left in March 1959, Billie followed him in July 1959. It was as if they both knew we can't be apart in this world, we can't be together, so let's meet in the next world. And maybe they did. Maybe now, somewhere, Billie is singing, and Lester is accompanying her with his saxophone. And now there's no Mary, no FBI, no pain, just music, and an eternal love. This story teaches us something. Love isn't just physical. Love can sometimes be a glance, a note, a silence, and true love never ends. Billie and Lester died physically, but their love still lives and plays in every recording, in every performance, in every listening. Their story is our story. Because there's a Billie inside all of us, there's a Lester inside all of us, the person we could never have but can never forget. And maybe that's enough. Maybe some loves exist not to be consumed, maybe some bonds exist to be frozen forever. Billie Holiday and Lester Young showed us this, and now, more than 60 years later, their love is still here, still alive, still breathing, because true love is immortal. And music keeps that love alive forever.